Sarah Mitchell walked through the main gate of Naval Base San Diego just as the sun painted the sky orange and pink. Her combat boots made soft sounds on the concrete as she headed toward the training facility. Most people on base didn't know her real story. They saw a woman in her late 20s with short brown hair and quiet eyes. They thought she was just another support staff member or maybe a new recruit. But Sarah was neither of those things. She was Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, one of only a handful of women who had completed the grueling Navy SEAL training program. For the past 3 years, she had been part of classified operations that took her to dangerous places around the world. Her teammates knew her skills. They had seen her work in combat zones where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. The morning air was cool against her face as she walked past rows of military vehicles. Sarah enjoyed these quiet moments before the base came fully alive. Soon, hundreds of sailors and Marines would be moving around, starting their daily routines. But, for now, she had time to think and prepare for another day of training. As she approached the main training building, Sarah noticed something unusual. A small group of people had gathered near the parking area. They were pointing at something and talking in excited voices. Sarah changed direction to see what was happening. When she got closer, she saw a man standing next to a red pickup truck. He was tall and muscular, wearing civilian clothes. His face was red with anger, and he was shouting at someone Sarah couldn't see yet. Other people stood around watching, but nobody was moving to help. "Get away from my truck," the man yelled. "I don't care who you think you are." Sarah moved around the crowd to get a better view. That's when she saw who the angry man was shouting at. It was Maria Santos, a young Navy technician who worked in the communications department. Maria was standing very still next to the truck, her hands raised slightly in front of her body. Her face was pale, and Sarah could see fear in her eyes. "I already told you," Maria said in a shaky voice. "I was just walking to my car. I didn't touch your truck." The man took a step closer to Maria. "You people think you can do whatever you want around here," he said. His voice was getting louder and more threatening. "Well, I've had enough of it." Sarah realized this wasn't just an argument. The man seemed unstable and dangerous. She also noticed that he kept one hand behind his back, as if he was hiding something. The crowd of onlookers was growing larger, but most people seemed frozen by the tension of the situation. Maria tried to take a small step backward, but she bumped into another parked car. She was trapped with nowhere to go. The angry man continued moving closer to her. "Please," Maria said. "I need to get to work. I don't want any trouble." That's when the man brought his hand from behind his back. Sarah's heart jumped when she saw what he was holding. It was a black pistol, and he was pointing it directly at Maria's chest. Several people in the crowd gasped and started backing away quickly. Someone screamed. But, instead of running like everyone else, Sarah felt her training take over. Every muscle in her body became alert and ready. Her mind began calculating distances, angles, and possibilities. The man with the gun was about 15 feet away from Maria. He was standing with his back partially turned to Sarah, which gave her some advantage. But, she also knew that any sudden movement could cause him to pull the trigger. Maria's life was hanging in the balance. "Nobody move," the man shouted, waving the gun slightly. "This woman needs to learn some respect." Sarah could see that Maria was trying very hard not to cry. Her whole body was shaking, but she was doing her best to stay calm. Sarah felt proud of the young sailor's courage, even in such a terrifying moment. Military police would arrive soon, Sarah knew. Someone in the crowd had probably already called for help. But she also knew that help might not come fast enough. The man with the gun seemed to be losing control of his emotions. His hands were shaking, and sweat was running down his face despite the cool morning air. Sarah began moving very slowly and quietly through the crowd. She kept her eyes on the gunman while staying low and trying not to attract attention. Her SEAL training had taught her how to move without being seen or heard. She had used these skills in real combat situations, but never on American soil. never to protect a fellow sailor from a dangerous civilian. As she got closer, Sarah could hear more of what the man was saying. He was talking about how military people thought they were better than everyone else. He mentioned losing his job and having problems with his family. Sarah realized he was probably having some kind of mental breakdown, which made him even more unpredictable and dangerous. "All you military people are the same," he said, still pointing the gun at Maria. "You think you can push regular folks around. You think you're so tough." Maria tried to speak calmly to him. "Sir, I understand you're upset about something. But I haven't done anything to hurt you. Could you please put the gun down so we can talk?" The man laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Talk? You don't want to talk. You just want me to go away so you can continue acting like you own this place." Sarah was now only about 10 feet behind the gunman. She could see that his finger was on the trigger of the pistol. One wrong word or movement could cause him to fire. She needed to act soon, but she also needed to be smart about it. The crowd around them had grown to about 20 people, but they were all standing far back now. Sarah could hear someone talking on a cell phone, probably calling for help. But she couldn't wait for backup to arrive. Sarah studied the man's stance and position. He was standing with his feet close together, which wasn't very stable. His attention was completely focused on Maria, which meant he wasn't watching for threats from other directions. These observations gave Sarah an idea for how to stop him without anyone getting hurt. But she also knew that what she was about to do would reveal her true identity to everyone watching. Until now, most people on base thought she was just another support worker. They didn't know about her special training or her real job. Once she acted, that secret would be over. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to move. She thought about Maria, who was probably someone's daughter or sister or girlfriend. She thought about all the other innocent people who might get hurt if this situation continued. Her decision was easy. The man raised his voice again. "I'm tired of talking. It's time for you military people to learn that you can't treat civilians like garbage." That's when Sarah made her move. In one fluid motion, she stepped forward and grabbed the man's wrist with both hands. She twisted his arm in a way that immediately caused him to drop the gun. At the same time, she swept his legs out from under him, causing him to fall backward onto the asphalt. The whole thing happened in about 3 seconds. One moment the man was threatening Maria with a loaded weapon, and the next moment he was lying on the ground with Sarah kneeling beside him, holding his arm in a position that prevented him from moving. "Don't struggle," Sarah said calmly. "You'll only hurt yourself." The man tried to fight back, but Sarah's grip was too strong and her position was perfect. He couldn't move his arm or get back to his feet. The gun was lying several feet away, completely out of his reach. Maria stood frozen for a moment, staring at Sarah with wide eyes. Then, she ran over and kicked the gun even further away from the man. "Thank you," Maria said, her voice still shaking. "I thought he was going to kill me." Sarah nodded but kept her attention on the man she was restraining. "Are you hurt?" she asked Maria. "No, I'm okay. Just scared." By now, the crowd was pressing closer to see what had happened. People were talking excitedly about what they had just witnessed. Many of them were looking at Sarah with surprise and curiosity. They had never seen anyone move like that before. "Who is she?" someone asked. "Where did she learn to do that?" asked someone else. Sarah could hear military police sirens getting closer. Soon, armed MPs would arrive to take control of the situation. The dangerous part was over, but Sarah knew that her quiet life on base was about to change dramatically. The man on the ground had stopped struggling. He was breathing hard and seemed to realize that fighting back was useless. "Let me go," he said. "I wasn't really going to hurt anyone." The gun was loaded and pointed at another person, Sarah replied. "That's attempted assault with a deadly weapon." 2 military police vehicles pulled into the parking area with their lights flashing. 4 armed MPs jumped out and ran toward the group of people. The crowd quickly moved back to give them room to work. "What's the situation?" called the lead MP, a sergeant with gray hair and muscular arms. "Civilian male threatened a Navy technician with a handgun," Sarah reported without letting go of the man's arm. "Weapon is secured and suspect is restrained." The MPs looked surprised to hear such a professional report from someone they didn't recognize. They moved quickly to take control of the scene, putting handcuffs on the man and reading him his rights. As Sarah stood up and brushed dust off her uniform, she noticed that everyone was staring at her. The MPs, the crowd of onlookers, and especially Maria all had questions in their eyes. "Ma'am," said the lead MP, "I'll need to get a statement from you about what happened here." "Of course," Sarah replied. "But, first, I want to make sure Technician Santos is okay." Maria walked over to Sarah with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You saved my life." Sarah put a gentle hand on Maria's shoulder. "Are you sure you're not injured? Sometimes shock can hide pain." "I'm okay, really." "But, how did you do that? Where did you learn those moves?" Before Sarah could answer, the MP sergeant interrupted. "I'm sorry, but I don't think we've met. What's your name and unit?" Sarah took a deep breath. She knew this was the moment when everything would change. "Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell," she said clearly. "Special Operations Command." The sergeant's eyebrows went up. "Special Operations? Are you sure?" Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out her military ID card. When the sergeant looked at it, his expression changed completely. He suddenly stood straighter and his voice became more formal. "I apologize, Lieutenant. I didn't recognize you." Word began to spread through the crowd about what Sarah had said. People started whispering to each other and pointing at her. Someone said the words "Special Operations" loudly enough for everyone to hear. Maria looked confused. "What special operations?" she asked. The MP sergeant glanced at Sarah before answering. "It's a classified unit, ma'am. I can't discuss details." But some of the older sailors in the crowd knew what those words meant. Special Operations was where the Navy's most elite fighters worked. It was where SEALs were assigned after they completed their training. Very few people qualified for that kind of work, and even fewer women. Sarah could see the realization dawning on people's faces. They were starting to understand that the quiet woman they had barely noticed before was actually one of the most highly trained warriors on the entire base. As the MPs led the gunmen away to their vehicle, more questions came from the crowd. "Are you really a SEAL?" someone asked. "How long have you been here?" asked someone else. Sarah raised her hand for quiet. "I can't discuss operational details," she said. "Right now, the important thing is making sure everyone is safe." But the questions didn't stop. People wanted to know how a woman could be strong enough to disarm a man twice her size. They wanted to know why they had never seen her in combat training with the other Special Forces personnel. Most of all, they wanted to know why she had been keeping her identity secret. As Sarah walked toward the MP vehicle to give her statement, she could feel dozens of pairs of eyes following her. Her secret was out now. Tomorrow, everyone on base would know that Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell wasn't just another support worker. They would know she was something much more rare and impressive. But Sarah wasn't worried about the attention. She was thinking about Maria, who was safe now. She was thinking about the dangerous situation that could have ended much worse if she hadn't been there to help. That's what mattered most. As she reached the police car, Sarah turned back to look at the crowd one more time. Some people were still staring at her with amazement. Others were talking excitedly about what they had just witnessed. A few were already walking away, probably heading to spread the news to friends and colleagues. Sarah smiled slightly. Her quiet morning routine was definitely over. But Maria Santos was alive and unharmed, and that made everything else worth it. 2 hours after the incident in the parking lot, Sarah sat in a small conference room in the military police headquarters building. The room had white walls, a metal table, and 4 uncomfortable chairs. A coffee machine hummed quietly in the corner, filling the space with the smell of burned coffee.
Across from Sarah sat Lieutenant Commander James Rodriguez, the base's chief of security.
He was a serious man in his 40s with dark hair and sharp eyes.
Next to him was Agent Patricia Walsh from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service.
She had been called in because the incident involved a civilian threatening military personnel with a weapon. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Commander Rodriguez began, "I want to thank you for your quick thinking this morning.
Your actions prevented what could have been a tragedy."
Sarah nodded but remained quiet. She had given her initial statement to the MPs, but she knew this conversation would be more detailed. Both investigators had copies of her service record in front of them, which meant they now knew things about her background that most people on base didn't know.
Agent Walsh leaned forward slightly.
"Your file makes for interesting reading," she said.
3 years in special operations. Multiple deployments to classified locations. Commendations for valor in combat. Yet until this morning, hardly anyone on base knew who you really were.
"That was intentional," Sarah replied.
"My current assignment doesn't require me to work directly with other units. I prefer to keep a low profile." Commander Rodriguez looked through some papers.
"According to your orders, you're here for advanced training and equipment testing.
Is that correct?"
"Yes, sir."
Agent Walsh made notes in a small notebook. "Tell me about the man with the gun. Had you ever seen him before today?"
Sarah shook her head.
"Never."
"From what I could hear, he seemed to have some kind of personal problems. He mentioned losing his job and having issues with his family."
"The suspect's name is David Thompson," Agent Walsh said.
"He's 34 years old and lives about 20 miles from here.
He was laid off from a construction job 2 months ago and has been struggling financially.
His wife filed for divorce last week."
Commander Rodriguez added more details.
"Mr. Thompson told the arresting officers that he came to the base this morning because he was angry about military spending. He said he couldn't understand why the government had money for the military but not for programs that could help people like him find work." Sarah felt some sympathy for the man's problems, but that didn't excuse what he had done.
Threatening innocent people with a weapon isn't going to solve his financial troubles.
"Agreed," said Agent Walsh. "But we need to understand why he chose to target Technician Santos specifically. According to witnesses, she was just walking to her car when he confronted her."
Sarah remembered the fear in Maria's eyes.
"It seemed random to me. I think she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time."
The investigators spent the next 30 minutes going over every detail of the incident.
They asked Sarah to describe exactly how she had disarmed Thompson and what techniques she had used. They wanted to know if she thought he would have actually pulled the trigger. "His finger was on the trigger," Sarah said. "His hands were shaking, and he seemed to be having some kind of emotional breakdown. Yes, I believe he would have fired the weapon."
Agent Walsh looked up from her notes.
"The gun was loaded with 6 rounds. Thompson told officers he brought it for protection, but admitted he was prepared to use it if necessary."
Commander Rodriguez closed his file folder. "Lieutenant, your actions this morning were exemplary.
You put yourself at risk to save another sailor's life. However, your intervention has created some complications we need to discuss." Sarah had been expecting this part of the conversation. "My cover is blown," she said simply.
"Exactly.
Word is already spreading around the base about what happened. By tonight, everyone will know that we have a female Navy SEAL working here." Agent Walsh explained the problem further. "Your current mission involves testing new equipment and tactics that are still classified.
Having attention focused on you could compromise operational security."
Sarah understood their concerns, but she didn't regret her actions.
"With respect, sir, I couldn't let an innocent person get hurt just to protect my cover identity." "Of course not," Commander Rodriguez agreed quickly. "Nobody is questioning your decision to intervene. We're just trying to figure out how to handle the situation moving forward." The door to the conference room opened, and another person entered. Sarah recognized him immediately.
It was Captain Michael Stevens, the commanding officer of the entire naval base.
He was a tall man with gray hair and the kind of presence that made everyone stand up straighter when he walked into a room. At ease, Captain Stevens said as Sarah started to rise. "I wanted to speak with you personally about this morning's incident." The captain sat down at the head of the table and looked directly at Sarah. "Lieutenant Mitchell, I've been reading your service record. It's quite impressive." "Thank you, sir." 3 tours in Afghanistan. 2 in Iraq. Multiple successful missions behind enemy lines.
Your teammates speak very highly of your skills and dedication.
Sarah waited for him to get to the point. She could tell there was more coming. Captain Stevens continued.
"What interests me most is how you've managed to stay under the radar here for 6 months.
Most of my officers didn't even know we had a SEAL assigned to this base."
I was following my orders to maintain a low profile, sir.
"And you did that very well. Until this morning." Agent Walsh spoke up.
"Captain, we were just discussing how to handle the security implications of Lieutenant Mitchell's exposure."
Captain Stevens nodded. "I'd been thinking about that too. But, first, I want to understand something. Lieutenant, when you saw what was happening in the parking lot, what went through your mind?" Sarah thought about the question carefully.
"I saw a fellow sailor in danger, sir. My training took over, and I acted to neutralize the threat."
"You didn't hesitate? You didn't think about protecting your cover or your mission?" "No, sir. Those considerations didn't occur to me until after the situation was resolved." Captain Stevens smiled slightly. "That tells me everything I need to know about your character."
He turned to the other 2 investigators. "Commander Rodriguez, Agent Walsh, I think we need to change our perspective on this situation."
Commander Rodriguez looked confused. "Sir?
Instead of viewing Lieutenant Mitchell's exposure as a problem, maybe we should see it as an opportunity."
Agent Walsh leaned forward. "What kind of opportunity?" Captain Stevens explained his thinking.
"The Navy has been working hard to increase diversity in our special operations forces. Having a successful female SEAL is significant, but keeping her hidden doesn't help inspire other women to pursue similar careers."
Sarah felt uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation.
"Sir, I didn't join the SEALs to be a symbol or a role model.
I joined to serve my country."
"I understand that, Lieutenant. But symbols matter, especially for young women who might be considering military careers."
"Today, you showed everyone on this base what a well-trained female operator can accomplish."
Commander Rodriguez was starting to understand the captain's point.
"You're thinking about using this incident for recruitment purposes?" "Among other things, yes.
But, more importantly, I think Lieutenant Mitchell's presence here could be valuable for training purposes as well."
Agent Walsh looked skeptical. "How so?" Captain Stevens turned back to Sarah. "How would you feel about taking on some additional duties? Specifically, helping to train other personnel in close-quarters combat and threat response?" Sarah was surprised by the suggestion. "My current assignment is equipment testing, sir." "Which you could continue.
But you could also share your expertise with others."
This morning proved that even basic self-defense training could save lives."
The captain explained his vision. The base had thousands of personnel who might someday find themselves in dangerous situations. Most of them had basic military training, but very few had the kind of advanced skills that Sarah possessed. "Think about Technician Santos," Captain Stevens said. "She's a smart, capable sailor, but she had no idea how to handle an armed threat.
What if we could give her and others some basic training in threat assessment and response?" Sarah began to see the merit in the idea.
"It would be challenging to teach advanced techniques to people who don't have extensive combat experience." "That's exactly why we need someone with your background," Commander Rodriguez added.
"You know how to break down complex skills into teachable components." Agent Walsh raised a practical concern. "What about operational security?"
"If Lieutenant Mitchell is teaching classes and giving demonstrations, it will be even harder to maintain any kind of cover."
Captain Stevens had thought about that too. We'll develop a new cover story. Lieutenant Mitchell can be officially assigned as a special instructor for defensive tactics training. That's true, but it doesn't reveal the full extent of her background. The conversation continued for another hour as they worked out the details.
Sarah would continue her equipment testing mission, but she would also develop a training program for base personnel.
The program would focus on practical skills like threat recognition, basic self-defense, and crisis response. What about the media attention? Agent Walsh asked.
A story about a female SEAL disarming a gunman is exactly the kind of thing that newspapers and television stations love to cover.
Captain Stevens had already considered that possibility. We'll handle any media inquiries carefully.
We can confirm that a qualified instructor neutralized a threat, but we won't provide personal details about Lieutenant Mitchell. Sarah appreciated the captain's efforts to protect her privacy, but she knew that complete anonymity was probably impossible now.
Too many people had witnessed what happened in the parking lot.
As the meeting was winding down, there was a knock on the conference room door. A young sailor entered with a message for Captain Stevens. "Sir, there's a reporter from the San Diego Union Tribune on the phone.
She's asking about this morning's incident." Captain Stevens looked at the other people in the room. "It's starting already." Agent Walsh closed her notebook. "I'll handle the media calls for now.
We need to control the narrative before rumors start spreading." As they prepared to leave the conference room, Sarah had mixed feelings about everything that had been discussed. Her quiet assignment had suddenly become much more complicated. But she also realized that there might be some positive aspects to the changes. "Lieutenant," Captain Stevens said as they walked toward the door, "I want you to know that what you did this morning was heroic. You put yourself at risk to save another person, and that kind of courage is exactly what the Navy represents."
Sarah nodded respectfully. "Thank you, sir. One more thing. I'd like you to check on Technician Santos later today. Make sure she's handling the stress of what happened." "I was planning to do that anyway, sir."
As Sarah left the military police building and walked back toward her own unit, she thought about how much her life had changed in just a few hours. This morning, she had been an anonymous instructor working quietly on classified projects. Now she was going to be teaching defensive tactics to hundreds of personnel while dealing with media attention and increased scrutiny.
But when she thought about Maria Santos, Sarah knew she had made the right choice.
Some things were more important than maintaining cover or avoiding complications. Protecting innocent people was always the right thing to do, no matter what challenges it might create later. The sun was high in the sky now, and the base was busy with normal daily activities. As Sarah walked past groups of sailors and Marines, she noticed that some of them were looking at her with new interest. Word was definitely spreading about the morning's events.
Sarah took a deep breath and prepared for whatever came next.
Her quiet days on the base were over, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing after all. 3 weeks after the parking lot incident, Sarah stood in front of a classroom filled with 30 sailors and Marines. The training facility had been modified to include both a lecture area and a practical exercise space with foam mats covering the floor. Large windows let in the afternoon sunlight, making the room feel open and welcoming rather than intimidating. The faces looking back at Sarah were a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and genuine interest. Word had spread throughout the base about her background and what she had accomplished during the confrontation with the armed civilian. Some people were eager to learn from her experience, while others weren't sure what to expect from a training program designed by a female SEAL.
"Good afternoon, everyone," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the room.
"I'm Lieutenant Mitchell, and, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to work together on defensive tactics and threat response." She looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. "Before we start, I want to address something that I know many of you are thinking about. 3 weeks ago, I was involved in an incident where I had to disarm an armed civilian. Some of you witnessed that event, and others have heard stories about it." A young Marine in the front row raised his hand.
"Ma'am, is it true that you're a Navy SEAL?" Sarah had expected this question.
Captain Stevens had authorized her to confirm her SEAL status, but only in general terms. Yes, I completed SEAL training and have served in special operations for several years.
However, the focus of this course isn't my background.
It's about giving all of you practical skills that could save your life or someone else's life in an emergency. She walked over to a whiteboard and wrote several words: awareness, assessment, action, aftermath. These are the 4 phases of threat response that we'll be covering. Let's start with awareness. Sarah explained that most dangerous situations could be avoided entirely if people learned to recognize warning signs early. She told stories from her own experience about times when paying attention to small details had prevented much larger problems. In Afghanistan, she said, my team once avoided an ambush because we noticed that the normal street vendors weren't in their usual spots. Something that small told us the local population knew danger was coming. A Navy technician raised her hand. But how does that apply to situations here on base?
We're not in a combat zone.
You're right, but the principle is the same, Sarah replied. The man who threatened Technician Santos showed several warning signs before he pulled out the weapon. He was agitated, he was sweating, and he kept one hand hidden behind his back. If someone had recognized those signs and called for help earlier, the situation might never have escalated. For the next hour, Sarah taught the class about body language, environmental awareness, and the importance of trusting instincts when something felt wrong. She had everyone practice scanning a room and identifying potential threats or escape routes.
The goal isn't to make you paranoid, she emphasized. It's to make you more observant and prepared. During the break, several students approached Sarah with questions. Maria Santos was among them. She had volunteered for the first training session despite the trauma she had experienced. Lieutenant Mitchell, Maria said quietly, I keep thinking about that morning. I should have noticed that something was wrong with that man before he pulled the gun. Sarah put a hand on Maria's shoulder. Maria, you did nothing wrong.
You were focused on getting to work, which is completely normal. But, now that you've been through that experience, you're more aware of potential dangers. That awareness will help protect you in the future. Another student, a young sailor named Johnson, had a different concern. Ma'am, I've been in the Navy for 2 years, and I've never been in any kind of dangerous situation.
Do you really think this training is necessary for people like me?
Sarah understood his perspective. Johnson, I hope you never need to use these skills.
But danger can come from anywhere, at any time.
The civilian who threatened Maria wasn't supposed to be on base, but he got through security anyway.
Domestic violence, robbery, terrorist attacks, these things can happen anywhere. When class resumed, Sarah moved on to the second phase, assessment.
This involved learning to quickly evaluate a threatening situation and determine the best course of action.
Not every situation requires physical intervention, she explained. Sometimes the best response is to call for help. Sometimes it's to escape. Physical confrontation should always be the last resort. She set up several role-playing scenarios for the students to practice.
In one exercise, a civilian approached a sailor in an aggressive manner. The students had to decide whether the situation could be resolved through talking, whether they should call for backup, or whether they needed to prepare for physical defense. The key is to stay calm and think clearly, Sarah said as she watched the exercises. Fear and panic will cloud your judgment and limit your options. One scenario involved a situation similar to what had happened with Maria. A student played an agitated person with a concealed object, while another student had to decide how to respond. Most of the class chose to call for help and try to de-escalate the situation through conversation.
That's exactly right, Sarah told them.
My situation was unusual because there wasn't time to wait for backup. If I had tried to call for help first, Maria might have been shot before anyone could arrive. The third phase, action, was where the training became more physical.
Sarah taught basic self-defense techniques that could be used if someone was grabbed or attacked.
She emphasized moves that were simple enough to remember under stress and effective enough to create an opportunity to escape. I'm not trying to turn you into Navy SEALs, she said as she demonstrated how to break free from a wrist grab.
I'm giving you tools that might save your life in an emergency.
She paired up students to practice the techniques she had shown them. The room filled with the sounds of people moving around on the mats and practicing the defensive moves.
Sarah walked among the pairs, offering corrections and encouragement.
Remember, she called out, the goal is always to create distance between yourself and the attacker, then escape to safety.
You're not trying to win a fight. You're trying to survive.
Some students picked up the techniques quickly, while others struggled with the physical coordination required. Sarah worked patiently with everyone, adjusting her teaching style to match each person's learning pace. Petty Officer Williams, she said to a sailor who was having trouble with one of the moves, don't worry about being perfect.
Just focus on the basic motion. Muscle memory will develop with practice. During one exercise, a large Marine named Rodriguez asked, "Ma'am, what if someone is much bigger and stronger than you are? These moves don't seem like they would work against someone like me." Sarah smiled. "That's a great question. Let me show you something." She asked Rodriguez to grab her wrist as tightly as he could. He was about 6 feet tall and weighed at least 200 pounds, while Sarah was several inches shorter and much lighter. When he gripped her wrist, it looked like there was no way she could break free. But Sarah used leverage and proper technique to escape his grip in less than 2 seconds. The class watched in amazement as she demonstrated how physics and training could overcome raw strength. Size and strength matter, she explained, but technique matters more. Rodriguez, try to grab me again, but this time I want you to resist when I try to break free. He grabbed her wrist again and tensed his muscles to maintain his grip. Sarah used a different technique this time, one that applied pressure to sensitive points on his hand while using her whole body to generate leverage. Once again, she broke free easily. The human body has certain weak points that anyone can exploit if they know how, Sarah said. These techniques work because they're based on anatomy and physics, not just muscle power. She taught the class several more techniques designed specifically to help smaller people defend themselves against larger attackers. The students practiced with enthusiasm, many of them surprised by how effective the moves could be when performed correctly. The final phase, aftermath, dealt with what to do after a threatening situation was resolved. Sarah explained the importance of seeking medical attention, even for minor injuries, and the need to report incidents to proper authorities. You might think you're fine after an adrenaline rush, she said, but shock can mask serious injuries. Always get checked by medical personnel after any physical confrontation. She also talked about the psychological effects of violence and the importance of counseling or support groups for people who had experienced traumatic events. There's no shame in asking for help, she emphasized. What happened to Maria was terrifying, and it would be normal for anyone to have lasting emotional effects from something like that. Maria nodded from her seat in the front row. "I've been seeing a counselor on base," she said. "It's really helping me process what happened." As the first class session came to an end, Sarah assigned homework for the students to practice the techniques they had learned. She also gave them exercises in situational awareness to complete during their normal daily routines. "Pay attention to your surroundings this week," she instructed. "Notice things you might normally ignore. Practice identifying potential threats and escape routes. We'll discuss your observations next week." After the students had left, Sarah spent time organizing her notes and preparing for the next session. She was pleased with how the first class had gone, but she also realized how much work lay ahead. Captain Stevens appeared in the doorway of the classroom. "How did it go?" he asked. "Very well," Sarah replied. The students were engaged and asked good questions. "I think this program can make a real difference. Any challenges I should know about?" Sarah thought about the question. "Some people are still more interested in my background than in learning the skills I'm teaching. But I think that will fade as we focus more on practical training." Captain Stevens nodded. The base chaplain mentioned that several people have come to him with questions about dealing with violence and trauma. "It seems like your class is already making people think about personal safety in new ways." "That's exactly what we want," Sarah said. "Awareness is the first step toward prevention." As she gathered her materials to leave, Sarah reflected on how much her role had changed since the parking lot incident. 3 weeks ago, she had been an anonymous equipment tester. Now she was an instructor whose work might impact hundreds of people. The responsibility felt heavy, but also meaningful. If her training could prevent even one person from becoming a victim of violence, all the effort would be worthwhile. Outside the training facility, Sarah noticed several students from the class walking together toward the dining hall. They were discussing the techniques she had taught and comparing notes about the situational awareness exercises. Maria Santos was among them, talking animatedly about something she had learned. Seeing Maria's confidence and enthusiasm made Sarah feel proud of what they were accomplishing together. The program was just beginning, but Sarah could already see that it was going to be successful. More importantly, it was going to make the base a safer place for everyone who served there. 6 months after the parking lot incident, Sarah stood at attention in the base auditorium as Captain Stevens prepared to address a crowd of over 500 military personnel, their families, and distinguished guests. The auditorium was filled with the sounds of quiet conversation and shuffling papers as people found their seats for the award ceremony. Sarah felt uncomfortable with all the attention focused on her, but she understood the importance of the event. The Navy had decided to formally recognize her actions that morning when she had saved Maria Santos from an armed attacker. More importantly, they wanted to highlight the success of the defensive tactics training program that had grown out of that incident. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Stevens announced from the podium, "please take your seats so we can begin this afternoon's ceremony." The conversations gradually died down as people settled into their chairs. Sarah could see familiar faces throughout the crowd. Maria Santos was sitting in the front row with her parents, who had flown in from Texas to attend the ceremony. Many of Sarah's current and former students were scattered throughout the auditorium, along with colleagues from her equipment testing assignment and various base personnel she had worked with over the past year. What surprised Sarah most was seeing several people from her SEAL unit who had traveled to San Diego specifically for this event. Her former teammates rarely appeared at public ceremonies, preferring to maintain their anonymity. Their presence meant more to her than any official award ever could. Today, Captain Stevens continued, "We are here to honor extraordinary courage and dedicated service. But we are also here to celebrate the positive changes that can result when one person's heroic actions inspire broader improvements in how we prepare our personnel for dangerous situations." He gestured toward a large screen that displayed statistics about the defensive tactics training program. Over the past 6 months, more than 800 base personnel had completed the course. Exit surveys showed that 96% of participants felt more confident about handling threatening situations, and several people had already used the training to avoid or escape from dangerous encounters. "The program that Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell developed has exceeded all our expectations," Captain Stevens said. "But before we discuss the program's success, let's remember how it all began." The screen changed to show a timeline of events from the morning when David Thompson had threatened Maria Santos with a loaded handgun. Sarah watched as Captain Stevens described how a routine morning had turned dangerous in a matter of seconds. Technician Maria Santos was walking to her car when she was confronted by an armed civilian who was experiencing personal problems and had decided to take out his frustrations on military personnel, the captain explained. Santos found herself trapped between parked cars with nowhere to run and no help in sight. Sarah remembered the fear she had seen in Maria's eyes that morning. Even 6 months later, the memory of that moment still made her feel protective and alert. Fortunately, Captain Stevens continued, Lieutenant Mitchell was in the area and recognized the danger immediately. Using her advanced training and combat experience, she was able to disarm the attacker without anyone being injured. The screen showed a diagram of how Sarah had approached and neutralized the threat. The presentation didn't include all the tactical details, but it gave the audience a clear understanding of what had happened. "What Lieutenant Mitchell did that morning was heroic by any measure," the captain said. "But what makes her story truly remarkable is what happened next." He went on to describe how Sarah had worked with base leadership to develop a comprehensive training program that could help other personnel handle similar situations. The program had started with basic defensive tactics but had evolved to include threat assessment, crisis communication, and psychological support for people who had experienced violence. Instead of simply returning to her regular duties after the incident, Captain Stevens explained,
Lieutenant Mitchell saw an opportunity to share her knowledge and experience with others. She understood that true security comes not from having one highly trained individual available, but from ensuring that everyone has the skills and confidence to protect themselves and their colleagues. Sarah felt a mix of pride and embarrassment as the captain described her contributions to the base's security improvements. She had never intended to become the focus of such attention, but she was genuinely pleased with what the training program had accomplished. The screen changed again to show testimonials from people who had completed the defensive tactics course. A young Marine talked about how the situational awareness training had helped him avoid a potential robbery while off duty. A Navy technician described using de-escalation techniques to calm down an angry civilian during a family emergency. Most moving of all was Maria Santos herself, who spoke directly to the camera about how the training had helped her regain confidence after the traumatic experience in the parking lot. "Lieutenant Mitchell didn't just save my life that morning," Maria said in the recorded interview. "She also helped me find the strength to move forward and feel safe again. The training program taught me that I don't have to be a victim. I can take control of my own security and help protect other people too." Captain Stevens called Maria to the front of the auditorium to say a few words in person. She walked to the podium with confidence and poise that contrasted sharply with the frightened young woman Sarah remembered from 6 months earlier. "When I think about what happened that day," Maria began, "I remember feeling completely helpless. I thought I was going to die, and there was nothing I could do about it. But Lieutenant Mitchell showed me something important. She showed me that there are always options, even in the worst situations." Maria looked directly at Sarah as she continued speaking. "The training program that grew out of that experience has changed how I think about my own safety and my responsibility to help others. I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago, and that's because Lieutenant Mitchell was willing to share what she knew with all of us." The audience applauded as Maria returned to her seat. Captain Stevens then called Sarah forward to receive her official commendation. As she walked toward the podium, Sarah could hear individual voices calling out encouragement and support. "Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell," Captain Stevens announced formally, "for exceptional bravery in the face of immediate danger and for outstanding service in developing innovative training programs that have enhanced the safety and readiness of naval personnel, you are hereby awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal." As the captain pinned the medal to Sarah's uniform, she thought about all the people who had contributed to the success of the training program. The award was being given to her, but the real achievement belonged to everyone who had worked together to make the base a safer place. "Lieutenant," Captain Stevens said quietly as he finished with the medal, "would you like to say a few words to the audience?" Sarah nodded and stepped to the microphone. She looked out at the crowd and saw faces that represented many different aspects of her life and service. Her SEAL teammates, her students, her colleagues from the equipment testing program, and many others who had become part of her extended military family. "Thank you for this honor," she began. "But I want to be clear about something. What happened 6 months ago wasn't about me being a hero. It was about recognizing that we all have a responsibility to protect each other." She paused to gather her thoughts. Public speaking wasn't her favorite activity, but she wanted to convey something important about the lessons they had all learned together. "When I saw Technician Santos in danger, I didn't think about my cover identity or my mission or what the consequences might be for my career. I just saw a fellow sailor who needed help, and I acted accordingly." That's what any of you would have done in the same situation. Several people in the audience nodded in agreement. Sarah could see Maria's parents wiping away tears as they listened. "The training program we developed isn't really about fighting or self-defense," Sarah continued. "It's about awareness, preparation, and taking care of each other. It's about making sure that no one has to face danger alone." She talked about how the program had evolved to include not just physical techniques but also psychological support and community building. Students who completed the course often formed informal support networks that extended far beyond the training sessions. "I've learned as much from teaching as my students have learned from taking the course," Sarah said. "They've taught me that courage comes in many different forms. It's not just about disarming attackers or completing dangerous missions. It's also about coming to class even when you're scared, practicing new skills even when they feel awkward, and being willing to help your colleagues even when it's inconvenient. She looked directly at Maria as she spoke her final words. 6 months ago, Technician Santos showed tremendous courage just by surviving a terrifying experience and, then, choosing to move forward with her life and her career. That kind of courage is just as important as any combat action, and it deserves just as much recognition. The audience erupted in sustained applause as Sarah stepped away from the microphone. As she returned to her place on the stage, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction about what they had all accomplished together. After the formal ceremony ended, a reception was held in the base dining hall. Sarah found herself surrounded by well-wishers and people who wanted to share their own stories about the training program's impact on their lives and work. One of the most meaningful conversations was with Chief Petty Officer Martinez, a veteran sailor who had initially been skeptical about learning defensive tactics from a female instructor. "Lieutenant," he said with obvious sincerity, "I owe you an apology. When I first heard about your class, I thought it was going to be some kind of publicity stunt. I couldn't have been more wrong." He explained how the situational awareness training had helped him recognize signs of domestic violence in one of his junior sailors. His intervention had likely prevented a serious assault and had connected the victim with counseling and support services. "That young sailor is getting her life back together now," Martinez said. "And it started because your training taught me to pay attention to warning signs I might have missed before." Similar stories came from dozens of other people throughout the evening. Sarah was amazed by the ripple effects that had resulted from that one morning in the parking lot. The training program had touched hundreds of lives and had created a culture of mutual protection and support that extended throughout the base. As the reception was winding down, Sarah found a quiet moment to speak with her former SEAL teammates who had attended the ceremony. Chief Warren, who had been her squad leader during 2 deployments in Afghanistan, pulled her aside for a private conversation. "Mitchell," he said with a grin, "when I heard you had blown your cover to help some technician, I thought you had lost your mind. But, after seeing what you've built here, I realize you did something smarter than any of us understood at the time." He explained that the SEAL community had been watching the success of her training program with great interest. Several other bases had requested similar programs, and there was talk of incorporating some of her techniques into standard military training curricula. "You've taken what we do in special operations and found a way to share it with regular personnel," Chief Warren said. "That's not easy to accomplish, and it's going to have lasting impact on how the military thinks about personal security." As the evening came to an end, Sarah walked back to her quarters with mixed emotions. The awards ceremony had been an honor, but it also marked the end of a chapter in her military career. Her equipment testing assignment was nearly complete, and she would soon be receiving new orders. She didn't know yet where the Navy would send her next, but she was confident that the experience of the past year had changed her perspective on what it meant to serve. Being a SEAL was still important to her, but she had learned that there were many ways to protect people and serve the greater good. The training program would continue even after she left the base. Maria Santos had volunteered to help train new instructors, and several other personnel had shown interest in taking on leadership roles. What had started as an emergency response to a dangerous situation had become a permanent part of the base's safety and readiness procedures. As Sarah reached her building, she looked back at the base that had become her home for the past year. Lights were still on in many of the buildings where people were working late shifts or studying for advancement exams. Tomorrow, hundreds of those people would go about their duties with increased confidence and awareness because of the training they had received. That knowledge made all the attention and recognition worthwhile. Sarah had joined the military to protect people, and, in ways she had never expected, that mission continued to evolve and find new expressions. The parking lot where everything had started was quiet now, illuminated by security lights and empty except for a few parked cars. But Sarah would always remember it as the place where she learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in distant combat zones, but right in your own backyard, protecting the people who serve alongside you every day.